want to talk a little bit about soil health, because I don't know about people watching, but I do the things that I'm taught to do, you know, what I feel is right, which is basically go buy some triple mix, go buy some manure, dump it on top of my garden, and just, you know, mix it in a little bit, and then it's ready for planting. But I don't get the greatest yield. So what do I really need to do, and what am I doing wrong?
The biggest thing you're probably doing wrong is however you're mixing it in, because what happens is you can grow perfect vegetables on triple mix.
Okay.
Triple mix works well, and that's just a mixture of typically compost, peat moss, and probably perlite, maybe vermiculite. Those are the three items in triple mix, and you can grow just fine in that. But the key is try to incorporate it into your soil, and especially around in Ontario, it's very clay heavy soil.
Yeah.
And if you just pile things on top of the soil and kind of mix it up and plant into it, you've given yourself a clay pan base, and then some really good quality soil on top.
Yeah.
And then every time it rains, it just goes down to the clay pan, but it doesn't go below that. But what you can do is if you really kind of dig in, whether with a broad fork, which is a very large garden fork with 10 to 12 inch tines on it.
Is that like one of those hard rakes? Is that what that is?
That helps for kind of getting the top 2 or 3 inches. But this one, the tines themselves, so picture a garden fork or a pitchfork, but thicker, and it's about that wide probably. That's why it's called a broad fork. The tines are 10 to 12 inches, and you can actually stand on it. It's got 2 handles. You stand on it, you move it back and forth, and you basically try to break up the clay pan.
So is that all you're doing? You're basically just moving it back and forth? You're not trying to lift it up and turn it?
Yeah, you generally you don't want to turn soil
Okay.
over. You just try to loosen it up, and then the space that you've made, you fill it with that triple mix or with compost or just kind of any type of organic matter. Just get it in between the clay particles, and it prevents them from just binding again and creating that clay pan. You're giving somewhere for the water to go, you're giving somewhere for your plant roots to go, and you're also adding more and more nutrients, especially when you do it every year. Every year your soil gets much more fertile to a much deeper level. And then you just give something that the plants can grow into. The other thing you can do is, so you do this every year. When you harvest your plants and you remove the plants from the garden at the end of the year, don't pull the plant. Just cut it at the base and let the roots rot into the ground, because that's doing the same thing as the broad fork. The roots will basically rot. It's going to create air pockets, but they'll also create nutrients. And then lastly, and maybe most important of all, is rotate your plants. Because
if I grew tomatoes over here one year, move them over there?
Tomatoes are the one exception, but in general, yes. Most plants, they go after particular nutrients from the ground. So if you've got cabbages, they're going after their favorite nutrients. And if you grow cabbages in the same spot every year, then it's taking the same nutrients out of the soil every year. Okay. So if you don't replace those exact nutrients, you're creating an imbalance. Whereas if you move the cabbage around every year on typically a 4 or 5 year cycle, and then put something else where the cabbage was the next year, and then something else in the year after that, each of those is doing different things to the soil, removing different nutrients from the soil, and it just makes your soil more fertile and more balanced.
Okay. Now, how do I know what's going to grow in my soil?
A lot of it is, there is some trial and error. If you really want to know...
I've been doing a lot of trial and error, with mostly error as the result.
You get better, but then you learn a lot. Speaking for myself, I learn probably a lot more from my errors than my successes.
Okay.
Because you celebrate the successes, you ponder the errors. So it's pretty good that way. But a lot of it, if you really want to know, you get your soil tested. You can do a soil texture test, and that's something called the mason jar test. You can just kind of Google mason jar test, and it'll tell you how to gauge the soil texture.
So you can do that test at home, or do you have to take it somewhere?
Nope, you can do that at home, and then it tells you the mixture of sand, silt, and clay in your soil.
Okay.
And if you know that mixture, if you've got a clay-heavy soil, you can remedy it through compost and triple mix, but you can also just work with it, and you grow things in the Brassica family in clay-heavy soil, and you grow a lot of herbs will do well in clay-heavy soil, but a lot of mostly native plants, plants that are from Ontario that have for generations only known clay-heavy soil. They will do just fine in that.
And so what falls into the Brassica family?
Cabbages, kale, Brussels sprouts, turnips, broccoli, cauliflower. Yeah, it's a huge family. It's some of the most healthy vegetables, and it can work in clay.
Okay.
But if you've got something like root vegetables, these are things like beets and carrots and whatnot, it's just there's a risk that it's going to rot into clay, plus it won't be able to penetrate very far into the clay. If you've got sandy soil, that's where you pull in the root vegetables. Yeah, and tomatoes are usually pretty accommodating, especially if it's cherry tomatoes. It'll accommodate a lot of different soils, and it's pretty good, and you don't need to rotate tomatoes. You might want to anyways, just it doesn't hurt.
Right.
But tomatoes, for whatever reason, will work in the same spot every year. Things like tomatoes and grapes, and there's a few others.
So what is that test called with the mason jar for people to look up?
It's just called the mason jar test, and that is the soil texture test. If you really also want to get a sense of the nutrients and get a sense of how fertile is my soil, what are my organic matter levels, and what should they be, and how to compare it to that, then you can send your soil to a lab. You would typically go to the University of Guelph, or you'd go to ANL Canada. I think their website is AL Canada. They will do soil testing. They've got the forms and the different types of tests.
Very high tech.
Yeah, that one you actually learn exactly what's going on in your garden and exactly what type of fertilizer to get.
Do you know what that costs?
For what's called a comprehensive test, it's somewhere in the $30 to $40 range.
Well, that's not bad.
Yeah,
Okay.
usually plus you have to courier a soil sample to them,
Right.
and they will have tutorials on how to take a sample of soil.
Amazing.
But it's not too bad, and you'll learn a lot about your garden. You don't have to do it every year, but if you do it initially to learn about your garden, that's going to help a lot as well.
Yeah, because it really is from soil up, isn't it? So it's all about what your soil is.
Yeah. So the vast majority of what plants need and what they take comes from the soil. So there's no better place to invest.
There you go, folks. $30 to $40, that's not so bad. And then you'll know exactly what to grow. Think of all the money you'll save on those plants that won't grow. And of course, you're going to save even more because now we're starting from seedlings, our own seedlings. Thanks so much, Derek. This has been so informative, and I'm going to have a bumper crop this year, I'm sure, right?
We have to make that happen now. So
We
absolutely.
have to.